The Krax warriors marched through the ruins of what had once been a human settlement, their heavy boots crushing debris beneath them. The air was thick with the scent of scorched earth, the remnants of past battles still lingering like ghosts. Their commander, Varkov, led the unit with calculated precision, his eyes scanning the horizon. They had fought humans before. They had conquered their colonies, crushed their armies, broken their spirits. But this was different. Something was wrong. His warriors were uneasy. He could sense it. These were not the young recruits who flinched at every sound. These were seasoned fighters, hardened veterans of war, yet their grip on their plasma rifles was tighter than usual. Their posture stiffened at every gust of wind, every rustle of metal against stone. There had been whispers among the ranks. Rumors. Something was hunting them. The reports had started a few weeks ago. At first, it was nothing unusual. Missing patrols, silent radios. A battlefield always devoured the weak. But then, the bodies started appearing. Or rather, parts of them. Clean shots, precise. A single wound to the head or heart. No sign of a struggle, no sign of an enemy. It was as if they had simply ceased to exist in the space of a breath. And no one ever saw it happen. Varkov didn't believe in myths, but he knew fear when he saw it. His warriors, the mighty Krax, known for their brute strength and their resilience, had begun whispering about the ghost. A human sniper, invisible, untouchable, who killed without mercy and vanished before anyone could retaliate. Some said he was a machine, a perfect weapon designed for assassination. Others claimed he was something far worse, a predator with infinite patience. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he had lost too many men to ignore the truth. Tonight, they would put an end to the stories. He had set a trap. The plan was simple. They would use a squad as bait, making it seem like a routine patrol through the ruins. Hidden within the shadows, Varkov and his best marksmen would watch from a distance. The moment the ghost struck, they would unleash their full firepower and incinerate him before he could escape. For hours, nothing happened. The squad moved cautiously through the rubble, following orders perfectly. Every so often, one of them would glance over their shoulder, expecting death at any moment. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Then it began. A single shot, not the loud burst of an energy weapon, but the sharp, distinct crack of a ballistic round slicing through the air. A Krax warrior in the patrol staggered, his massive body collapsing instantly. A perfect shot. No time to react. No chance to scream. The rest of the squad froze. Varkov's heart pounded in his chest. He activated his thermal scanner, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just cold ruins and lifeless corpses. His warriors were scanning, tracking, waiting for another shot. Then, another crack. Another body dropped. Panic set in. A soldier fired wildly into the darkness, his plasma rounds scorching the walls, shattering glass, kicking up dust. The others followed, spraying their weapons in every direction, their fear turning to blind aggression. Still, no sign of the enemy. Varkov's communicator crackled to life, his second-in-command's voice sharp with urgency. "We can't see him. We don't know where he is." Before Varkov could respond, another shot rang out. The voice on the radio cut off instantly. His second-in-command was dead. Cold dread settled in Varkov's gut. This wasn't war. This wasn't a battle. This was something else. This was a hunt. Silence stretched over the ruins once more. No more gunfire. No more movement. Only the sound of the wind whispering through the wreckage. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, a voice came through his communicator. Calm. Steady. Human. You're next. Varkov could feel the fear spreading through his warriors like a plague. It was unlike anything he had ever witnessed before. The mighty Krax were predators, creatures of brute force and overwhelming strength, yet here they were, standing frozen in the ruins of a dead city, their weapons clutched tightly in trembling hands. The silence that followed the last gunshot was deafening. Not a single soldier dared to speak, as if doing so would summon the ghost again. But he was already there, watching, waiting. The night stretched on, an unbearable weight pressing down on them. Varkov had trained for countless scenarios, had led his warriors into war against species that wielded advanced technology and devastating weapons. He had never feared them. He had always known where his enemies stood. He had always seen their faces before he crushed them. This was different. The humans had always been resilient, tenacious. Even when outnumbered, they fought with a fire that bordered on madness. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't rage or defiance. This was cold, calculated, a methodical dismantling of everything he knew about warfare. His warriors had been reduced to prey. One of them moved, too fast, too suddenly. A mistake. The shot was nearly silent, a whisper of death carried by the wind. The warrior's head snapped back, his massive frame crumpling to the ground in a heap of motionless flesh and armor. The others gasped, their eyes wide with disbelief. Varkov clenched his jaw, his pulse hammering against his skull. He forced himself to think. The enemy was using an outdated human weapon, ballistic rounds, something primitive compared to plasma or energy-based weaponry. Yet it was far deadlier in this terrain. No heat signature, no energy flare to trace back, just cold metal cutting through flesh at terrifying speed. A Krax soldier to his right activated a scanner, hoping to detect movement. The device flickered to life, scanning the ruins with advanced precision. But it found nothing. The sniper had already moved. Varkov had expected an enemy that engaged in combat, a warrior that could be fought. But this thing moved like a phantom. It was never in the same place twice. Every time they thought they had a lock on its location, another shot would come, from a different angle, a different height, a different impossible position. The remaining soldiers tightened their formation. A mistake. Another shot. Another body fell. The rest broke. A Krax warrior let out a guttural roar and unleashed a barrage of plasma fire into the ruins. The others followed, desperate to kill something. Anything that might be lurking in the shadows. The ancient buildings and shattered walls erupted in flames, but there was no scream, no impact against flesh. They were firing at nothing, wasting ammo. Varkov realized the truth too late. The sniper was controlling them, manipulating them, forcing them to make mistakes. Another shot, another death. The panic became unbearable. One of the younger warriors abandoned the formation entirely and ran. He sprinted toward the extraction point, desperate to escape the battlefield. The others watched in stunned silence as his massive frame disappeared into the distance. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of his heavy footsteps echoing through the ruins. Then the crack of a rifle. The warrior stumbled, his momentum carrying him forward even as a single hole appeared in the center of his skull. He collapsed, skidding lifelessly across the ground. No one spoke. No one moved. The sniper hadn't killed him for being a threat. He had killed him to send a message. There was no running, no hiding. There was only death. Varkov's grip on his weapon tightened. His mind raced, trying to think of a countermeasure, a way to fight back against something they couldn't see. This wasn't a battle. This was a game. And the sniper was toying with them, stretching out their suffering like a predator wearing down its prey before the final strike. The warriors stood in stunned silence, eyes darting through the shadows, searching desperately for the thing that hunted them. But it was useless. The ghost was already gone, already repositioning, already preparing for the next kill. Varkov had to act fast. If they stayed here, they would all die, one by one. He activated his communicator, his voice low but firm. "We retreat." There was no argument, no protest. His warriors wanted to run. But even as they turned, moving with caution, their steps careful and controlled, they all knew the truth. The ghost was watching, and he was far from done. The retreat was slow, painfully so. Every step felt like it might be the last. The Krax warriors moved cautiously, their massive bodies hunched low as they scanned the ruins for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just the eerie silence of a dead battlefield. The only sound was their own heavy breathing, the occasional clatter of loose rubble beneath their boots, and the wind whispering through the hollowed-out buildings. Varkov's mind was racing. They had underestimated this enemy. No, they had never even seen the enemy. They had assumed humans fought with firepower, numbers, and desperation. But this one fought with patience, with the kind of discipline that could drive even the bravest warriors to madness. Another hour passed, or maybe only minutes. Time felt stretched, distorted. His warriors were still moving, still trying to reach the extraction point, but the fear had settled in their bones now. Even those who had once been the loudest, the most eager for battle, were silent. Their eyes darted across the ruins, their bodies tensed for the inevitable shot that would claim the next life. But that was the cruelest part of it. The sniper wasn't shooting. Not anymore. It was worse than the killing. The waiting. The knowing that he was out there, watching, choosing his next target with eerie precision. If he wanted, he could have gunned them all down before they ever realized what was happening. But he didn't. He was letting them stew in their own terror. A Krax soldier twitched at the sound of shifting rubble, spinning his weapon toward the noise. Nothing. Just a collapsed wall, swaying slightly in the wind. Another soldier flinched when a discarded metal panel clattered against the stone, echoing in the night. Varkov could feel their minds unraveling, the cracks in their resolve widening with every passing second. And then the whispers began. At first, he thought it was static in his communicator. A garbled signal, maybe interference from the human ruins. But no, it was too deliberate, too intentional. Soft, almost playful, just a single word. Run. Varkov froze, his blood turning ice cold. He wasn't the only one who heard it. A warrior to his left let out a panicked breath, stepping backward as his gaze darted around wildly. Another's mandibles twitched, his grip on his weapon tightening until his claws dug into the metal. Then another whisper. Too slow. A soldier on the far right let out a growl, spinning in circles, his plasma rifle aimed at every possible shadow. His breath was heavy, his armor heaving with each panicked inhale. Then another. I see you. The warrior snapped. With a roar, he opened fire at nothing, his plasma rounds carving glowing lines into the night. His shot struck empty air, shattered abandoned structures, sent debris flying. But there was nothing there. Varkov clenched his jaw, furious at himself for letting this happen. This wasn't just a sniper. This was a psychological attack. The enemy wasn't just killing them. He was breaking them. Another whisper, softer this time. You should have stayed home. The soldier who had fired wildly turned, ready to say something. But his head snapped back with a sickening crack. A single round had punched through his skull. He crumpled to the ground, his weapon clattering beside him. No one even screamed this time. They had no breath left for screaming. Varkov could feel it now, the same feeling he had seen in the eyes of lesser species when they faced the Krax on the battlefield. Primal fear, the kind that didn't just threaten the body but crushed the soul. Another soldier took a step back, then another. His hands were shaking, his claws twitching against the trigger of his rifle. Then, in a sudden, panicked burst, he turned and ran. That was the breaking point. One by one, they abandoned formation. A trickle at first, then a flood. The proud warriors of the Krax Empire, the species that had once torn through entire human colonies without mercy, were now fleeing like prey. Varkov wanted to stop them. He wanted to bark orders, to bring them back in line, to restore their discipline. But he knew it was useless. The ghost had already won. The whispers had been real. The whispers had been in their heads. And now, they were running from shadows that weren't even there. Varkov didn't move. He wouldn't run. He couldn't. If he ran now, if he showed fear, it would mean something far worse than death. It would mean that the ghost was right, that the humans were no longer the prey, that the monsters in the dark weren't the Krax anymore. They were something else. He activated his communicator, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his chest. "We need reinforcements," he said, keeping his voice controlled. "We're being hunted." Static. He tried again. "Command, do you read me? We need immediate extraction." Nothing. Then, after several agonizing seconds, the static cleared. A response. But it wasn't command. It wasn't anyone he recognized. It was the ghost. His voice was calm, amused, almost bored. Too late. Then the line went dead. Varkoth stood frozen, his massive claws tightening around his rifle until the metal groaned under his grip. The communicator in his ear was dead silent now, but the human's last words still echoed in his skull. Too late. He wasn't sure how the ghost had intercepted their communications. Human technology wasn't advanced enough for that. At least, that's what the Krax Empire had always believed. But this wasn't about technology anymore. This was something else. Something more terrifying than any weapon or machine. This was control. And the ghost had all of it. His warriors were still running, their discipline shattered. The retreat had turned into a full-blown rout. Some tried to regroup, huddling behind chunks of broken concrete, but fear had already infected their minds. They flinched at every sound, their claws shaking on their weapons, their instincts screaming at them to flee. Another shot cracked through the ruins. A warrior to his left collapsed mid-sprint, his body skidding across the dirt before lying still. No one looked back. No one tried to recover his body, because no one wanted to be next. Varkoth gritted his teeth and turned his focus forward. They still had a chance. They had to reach the extraction point. If they could just get there, they could call in an orbital strike, level the entire city if necessary. Whatever this thing was, it couldn't survive that. He forced himself to move, keeping his posture strong even as his instincts screamed at him to run. He needed to set an example. He needed to make them believe they weren't completely powerless. But then something changed. The attack stopped. For the first time, in what felt like hours, the battlefield was silent. No gunshots, no whispers, no movement. That should have been a relief, but it wasn't. It was worse. Because now, they had no idea where the ghost was. Varkoth's mind raced. If the sniper had wanted to kill them all, he could have. He had every advantage. But instead, he had let them run, let them feel the terror creeping deeper into their bones. He wasn't hunting them to wipe them out. He was toying with them. A sudden, piercing noise split the air. A Krax soldier in the back of the formation screamed. Not a death scream. Not a warrior's final cry. A scream of pure, mindless terror. Varkoth spun around, raising his weapon, but there was no enemy. The soldier was backing away from something, his eyes wide, his mandibles trembling. His plasma rifle clattered to the ground. Forgotten. His massive frame shook as he stared at the ruins ahead, his breathing shallow and erratic. Varkoth followed his gaze. There, written across the cracked stone wall in blood, was a message. "You can't kill what you can't see." Varkoth felt a deep primal unease settle into his gut. This wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a graveyard, and the ghost was just letting them wander through it. The soldier who had screamed suddenly bolted. It was a mistake. A whispering crack cut through the night. A single shot. The running soldier jerked mid-step and collapsed face-first onto the ground, unmoving. A clean hole in the back of his skull. Another perfect shot. The panic hit hard. The remaining warriors backed away, their backs pressing against each other, their weapons shaking. Some aimed wildly into the darkness, hoping, praying, for a target. But there was nothing. Nothing except death waiting to happen. Varkoth forced himself to take control. Find him. He snarled, his voice a growl of command. "Scan every possible position. He is not a ghost. He bleeds like the rest of us." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. One of his warriors activated an advanced scanner, sweeping the battlefield for heat signatures. The device hummed, its interface glowing as it mapped the ruins in real time. The readings came back. Nothing. Nothing. Varkov's claws twitched. That was impossible. Even if the human was using terrain for cover, there would still be something. A trace of movement, a flicker of heat, something. But the scanner was completely empty, as if the enemy wasn't even there. Varkov felt his control slipping. He knew what was happening. He had seen it before in weaker species, in those who crumbled under the weight of the Krax Empire's might. The fear was sinking into their bones, and once fear took hold, it never let go. One of his officers, a hardened veteran who had once led entire planetary assaults, took a cautious step forward. He turned his head slightly toward Varkov, his voice tight with unease. "Sir, I think." A shot rang out. The officer's head snapped to the side, a red mist spraying into the air. His body fell before he could even finish his sentence. Silence. Then, over the communicator, a voice. Calm. Steady. Checkmate. Varkov didn't think. He reacted. Fall back. Now. The remaining soldiers scrambled, their discipline shattered beyond repair. They ran, stumbling over debris, not even trying to return fire. Varkov had no choice but to move with them. If he stayed, he was dead. As he ran, his mind raced with a single thought. This wasn't war. This was a massacre. The city burned in the distance, plumes of smoke curling into the night sky. Fires flickered against shattered buildings, casting eerie shadows that danced across the ruins. The remaining Krax warriors sprinted through the wreckage, their once proud formation reduced to a chaotic, desperate scramble for survival. Varkov pushed himself forward, his legs burning with effort. He wasn't running because he wanted to. He was running because there was no other choice. The enemy had them, not just physically, but mentally. The ghost had shattered their confidence, turned their superior numbers into a weakness. A force that should have been unstoppable had been reduced to nothing more than terrified prey. The sniper had done this alone. That was the worst part. One human, one warrior, one weapon. It was enough to tear through an elite Krax unit like a blade through soft flesh. The extraction point was close now. He could see the landing beacon flickering in the distance, casting its signal into the sky. The transport ship hovered just beyond the ruins, waiting to take them away from this nightmare. If they could just make it, they could call in reinforcements, orbital bombardments, firepower capable of turning this entire city into glass. That was the only way to kill this thing, to erase it. But something felt wrong. Varkov slowed, scanning the battlefield with wary eyes. It was too quiet. The sniper hadn't fired in minutes. No more whispers, no more perfectly placed shots. Why? The answer hit him like a warhammer to the chest. The ghost wasn't just letting them escape. He was hurting them. Before he could react, a sound cut through the silence. A sharp, metallic click. One of the Krax ahead of him barely had time to register the noise before the explosion tore through the ground. A pressure mine. The blast sent the warrior flying, his massive body thrown like a ragdoll before he crashed against a crumbling wall, unmoving. Another click. Another explosion. Two more warriors were taken out instantly. Their armor, designed to withstand energy weapons, was useless against the raw force of physical explosives. The sniper had planned for this. Varkov snarled in frustration, yanking one of his soldiers back just as he nearly stepped onto another mine. He forced them to spread out, to move carefully, but it was too late for strategy now. The panic had taken over. The remaining Krax sprinted toward the beacon, blind to the danger. Some made it through. Others weren't so lucky. Explosions erupted in quick succession, lighting up the night as warriors were torn apart. The extraction ship loomed just ahead, its ramp lowering to receive them. But before anyone could reach it, another shot rang out, a direct hit to the pilot's canopy. The Krax didn't need to see the damage to know what had happened. The ship tilted. The engine sputtered, plasma fire spewing from its wounded frame. A second later, it spiraled downward in a fiery arc, slamming into the ground with an earth-shaking impact. The transport was destroyed. Their way out was gone. Varkoth barely had time to process it before another shot rang out. The soldier closest to him dropped. Then another. The ghost was back, and now he was finishing the job. Varkoth dove for cover, rolling behind a broken structure as more gunfire rained down. He pressed his back against the cold stone, his claws tightening into fists. His warriors were dying all around him. Some fired blindly, others ran, but none of it mattered. The ghost had control. He had always had control. A Krax officer, desperate and furious, activated his communicator, his voice raw with rage. Command. This is Unit K-12. Extraction is down. We are being picked apart. We need orbital support now. There was a pause. Static. Then, finally, a response. Coordinates received. Orbital strike inbound. Varkoth exhaled. It was the only option left. The city would be destroyed. The sniper would die with it. That was the hope. The officer turned to him, breathing heavily. Sir, we need to fall back before the strike. A shot silenced him mid-sentence. The impact sent him sprawling backward, his lifeless body landing in the dirt with a dull thud. Varkoth barely had time to register the loss before he heard it, a sound so soft, so deliberate, that it made his blood turn to ice. Footsteps, real footsteps. For the first time, the sniper wasn't just a phantom in the shadows. He was moving, closing in. Varkoth gritted his teeth and turned, his plasma rifle snapping up. But there was no one there. Another shot rang out. This time, it struck his weapon, shattering the barrel. His arms jerked back from the force, and before he could react, another bullet tore through his knee. His leg buckled. He fell to the ground, a deep growl of pain escaping his throat. His vision blurred. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to move, to crawl toward cover. But then, a shadow moved in front of him. For the first time, he saw him. Not a myth, not a phantom. A man. The sniper stood just a few feet away, his form barely visible in the smoke. He was dressed in dark, worn combat gear, his face obscured beneath a helmet. The rifle in his hands was steady, the barrel aimed directly at Varkoth's skull. The warrior let out a heavy breath. He had fought countless battles. He had seen entire worlds burn. But in this moment, he understood why his soldiers had been so afraid. The sniper didn't speak at first. He just stared. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he finally broke the silence. His voice was calm, steady, cold. You should have run. Varkoth opened his mouth to snarl a response, to say anything. But the gunshot came first, and then there was only darkness. The silence after the final shot was suffocating. Smoke and dust still clung to the air, settling over the battlefield like a funeral shroud. The extraction ship burned in the distance, its once mighty frame now a twisted wreck of metal and fire. The bodies of the Krax warriors lay scattered across the ruins, motionless, their massive forms reduced to nothing more than corpses in the dirt. And the sniper was gone. By the time the first reinforcements arrived, there was no sign of him. No footprints, no discarded equipment, not even a single shell casing left behind. It was as if he had never been there at all. Only the dead bore witness to his presence, their lifeless bodies a testament to his precision. The Krax didn't understand. They couldn't. Their warriors had fought in thousands of battles across the galaxy. They had faced civilizations with energy shields strong enough to withstand nuclear blasts. They had crushed armies with superior numbers, brute force, and sheer will. They had never feared humans before. But now something had changed. The survivors, what little remained of them, were retrieved from the outskirts of the ruins, their armor dented, their spirits shattered. They didn't speak. Not at first. Their hands still trembled, their eyes darting to every shadow as if expecting another shot to come. Their commanders tried to debrief them, to demand answers. But how could they explain? How do you describe a nightmare? One by one, their reports trickled through the ranks. The whispers, the impossible shots, the way he had played with them, broken them, controlled them, the way he had hunted them, not for sport, not for revenge, but because he could. Word spread faster than the flames consuming the battlefield. It was no longer just a failed operation. It was a warning. The ghost had become more than a soldier. He had become a legend. At first, the Krax commanders refused to believe the reports. One human sniper. Impossible. It had to be an elite squad, a hidden artillery unit, some kind of experimental human technology they hadn't accounted for. They sent more scouts, analysts, forensic teams to comb through the ruins. But the truth was unavoidable. There was no hidden force, no unseen army, only one set of human footprints. One sniper, one man, one unstoppable nightmare. The higher-ups tried to suppress the reports, fearing what would happen if the rest of the Empire learned the truth. But fear doesn't stay buried for long. Soldiers talk, rumors grow, and soon, across every Krax outpost, every warship, every front line, the same story was whispered in hushed tones. A single human had wiped out an entire Krax unit, and no one had seen him coming. Some refused to believe it. They mocked the idea, calling it an exaggeration, a fabrication by weak-minded fools who had lost their nerve. But others knew better, because the reports kept coming. Different battlefields, different human colonies, different squads. And yet, the same pattern. Krax units would go silent. Their bodies would later be found with a single precise shot to the head or heart. No survivors, no witnesses. And worst of all, no one ever saw the shooter. Some claimed the humans had developed a new weapon, a long-range drone with AI so advanced it could predict movements before they happened. Others whispered that it wasn't a man at all, but something else, something that had learned to move in the shadows, something that didn't breathe, didn't bleed, something that was still watching. Fear spread through the ranks like wildfire. Some Krax squads flat out refused to be deployed in sniper territory. The bravest warriors in the Empire, beings who had once laughed in the face of human resistance, now hesitated at the idea of setting foot on a battlefield where they couldn't see the enemy. It didn't matter if it was one man or many. It didn't matter if it was real or just a story. The ghost was out there, and no one wanted to be his next target. The final breaking point came when an entire Krax battalion, over 1,000 warriors strong, was deployed to secure a strategic human outpost. The mission was simple. The numbers were overwhelming. Victory was all but certain. And yet, by the time reinforcements arrived, they found nothing but empty armor. The soldiers were gone. No bodies, no weapons, only their shattered helmets and abandoned rifles left behind in the dust. A message had been carved into the side of a ruined building, deep and precise, as if written by a careful, steady hand. Relentless help. That was the moment the Krax High Command made a decision no one had ever expected. They stopped sending ground troops against humans. Not because they couldn't win, not because they lacked the firepower, but because their soldiers were too afraid to fight. What had once been an empire that thrived on war now found itself facing something it couldn't understand, something it couldn't counter. The humans hadn't built a new weapon. They hadn't developed an advanced new strategy. They had simply become something worse than monsters. They had become hunters. And the worst of them, the ghost, was still out there, waiting, watching. And the Krax knew he wasn't done yet. The war had changed. It wasn't obvious at first, not to the politicians, the high-ranking officials, or the strategists who still believed the Krax Empire was unbreakable. But to the soldiers, the ones on the ground, the ones who had seen what the humans were capable of, it was undeniable. The battles didn't happen like they used to. The Krax, once the most feared warriors in the known galaxy, had built their entire empire on brute force and domination. They didn't believe in stealth, in patience, in fear. Their philosophy had always been simple: overwhelm, destroy, conquer. But now, they hesitated. Every time a deployment order came, warriors who had once been eager for battle found themselves pausing. They checked their equipment twice, then 3 times. They memorized every map, every exit, every possible vantage point. And no matter how much training they had, no matter how much their commanders assured them of victory, the same question lurked in the back of their minds. Is he out there? The ghost had become more than a legend now, more than a sniper, more than a soldier. He had become a nightmare. Entire units stationed on human-occupied planets began reporting shadows, a glimpse of movement where there shouldn't be, a faint reflection of light on a distant rooftop, a whisper over their comms, even when the channel was closed. And then, the worst sound of all, the sharp, clean crack of a single gunshot. Sometimes it was a direct hit, another officer taken out with terrifying precision. Other times it was a warning shot, a bullet placed so close to the target's head that they could hear it tear through the air. A reminder that they weren't in control anymore. The psychological damage was devastating. More than once, entire Krax units abandoned their posts without firing a single shot. Some dropped their weapons mid-march, refusing to step foot into human-controlled territory. Some vanished entirely, leaving behind nothing but discarded armor and helmets, as if they had simply given up and walked into the wilderness, hoping to escape. There was no escape. The ghost was always watching. One by one, the Krax commanders began to understand. They weren't fighting an enemy that played by the same rules. The humans had learned how to break them. And when a species that had spent its entire existence as prey suddenly became the predator, there was no stopping them. High Command tried to keep control. They sent in their best strategists, their most advanced tracking teams, their deadliest bounty hunters. They ordered sweeps of entire cities, scanning for anything, any clue, any sign of the sniper's presence. They found nothing, because by the time they thought they had located him, he was already gone. It wasn't just one man anymore. The ghost had started as a single sniper, a lone human with patience, skill, and an unnatural ability to control the battlefield. But now there were more. Reports began surfacing of other human snipers, each one just as disciplined, just as ruthless. Entire Krax platoons wiped out in the dead of night, ships taken out from impossible distances, entire regiments refusing to leave their barracks out of sheer terror. What had once been a nameless soldier had turned into an entire doctrine of war. It didn't matter where they deployed. It didn't matter how many soldiers they sent. The ghost, or those like him, were always one step ahead. And then came the final message. It happened on the bridge of a Krax warship, one of their most powerful command vessels stationed near the front lines. The ship was meant to be untouchable, surrounded by escorts, monitored by the best security the Empire could provide. No one knew how he got in. But when the captain entered his private quarters, he found a single bullet placed on his desk. No alarms had gone off. No one had seen an intruder. Just a single bullet. And next to it, scratched into the metal surface with precise, steady strokes, were 4 simple words. Next time, I won't miss. The message was clear. The Krax Empire, for all its power, for all its might, had finally encountered something it couldn't conquer. The war wasn't over. But for the first time in their history, the Krax weren't sure if they could win. Because the ghost wasn't just a sniper anymore. He was a warning. a message to every species that had ever looked at humanity and thought they were weak. That message was simple: fear the ones you cannot see. And from that moment on, every alien race in the galaxy did.